Hello, Rick. Hello.
Hey, Sarah, how you doing?
Very good. How are you?
Really well, thank you.
Okay, it's 4 o'clock, and we are so happy that the technology worked out fine. So we have some glitches, but we smooth it out. It should be working today. So, um, everybody, thank you for joining us. Please, continue to come when we do this once a month, every third Thursday of the month at 4 o'clock. So, um, hello everyone, welcome. My name is Sarah M. Thank you for joining us today. I'm happy to host my fellow author Rick Rhode with a history chat today. Again, my name is Sarah M. I'm an author of the book How I Survived the Killing Fields. We will be talking about the book, about the history, but now about my story. I just want to make sure that you understand that I'm not here to tell my story, but I have my friend Rick to tell about the history that he he would like to bring it to your attention. So our presenter today is a 10-time nonfiction book author and an authority on American history. His number 10 book is called They Made America Great. He spent most of his adult life living aboard boats and has traveled far and wide in America. So let's welcome Rick Rhode. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you.
Well, today the topic today is President Chester Arthur, the reluctant gentleman boss. Today you are going to be talking about the 21st President Chester Arthur. Arthur was President Garfield's second choice to be his vice president. In 1880, Arthur was largely considered a Repub- Republican hack. Arthur was also the fourth vice president to ascend to the presidency upon the death of the sitting president during the 19th century. He was supposed to be just a placeholder, but Chester Arthur proved to be anything but. I can't wait to hear his story, Ray.
Okay, and I can't wait to tell it. When I was a kid, I look at all the pictures of the presidents in the 19th century, and they all got fuzzy hair and sideburns, and I said, I didn't have any good or anything, and I looked into it much deeper, and one of them was definitely good, and I'm going to talk about him today. It's Chester Arthur, and he said it right, 21st president. Uh, he's kind of forgotten American history, and I don't think he should be, to tell you the truth. He did a lot of neat stuff. He's only in for 3.5 years. His biggest contributions were like a Navy and civil service reform. He is his father came from Northern Ireland, settled in New York, and was a big time abolitionist. Abolition are people who opposed slavery, and he got basically booted out of New York because of that, and went to Vermont, where Chester was born. 6 brothers and 2 sisters, a large family in a log cabin, and then he went to college in Schenectady, New York, and pretty young to do that. And after college, he and a friend went out west to try to start a business in Kansas before the Civil War, and it was a mess. They've said, "Man, this is rough." And Chester came back to New York City, where he stayed there the rest of his life, basically. He started his own law firm in 1854, and no, he started his law 1856, and he took a case on. He was an abolitionist about a black woman that was denied transportation on the street on the local um, subways. Not the subway, didn't have a subway back then. Streetcar, and she was kicked off, and he took her to court, and he won. And from then on, and some of the Rosa Parks, 100 years before Rosa Parks, he won, and black people were allowed to take the subway because of Chester Arthur's case. He was well educated, dignified, and charming, and he had a knack for organization. And in 1959, he married his love of his life, Nell Herndon. She was from the South. He doted on her, and all they had three children, but they lost one at the same time as the Battle of Gettysburg. He kind of gravitated to the Republican Party because of those abolitionist leanings. Uh, and he was getting a name for himself. And during the Civil War, he was appointed by the governor of New York to quartermaster of New York. For all the New York troops needed to be housed, fed, sheltered, and everything else. And he was responsible for that. Tens of thousands of troops from the state of New York, and he was running all that with his organizational skills. So he got noticed doing a good job with that. He was the quartermaster of the state of New York during the Civil War. He was marked by energy, honesty, integrity. And it's interesting, a lot of people in that position would take money and bribes and get things done. Chester Arthur would have none of that. But he did know how to make political connections, and he was very good at that. And after that, and when Grant and Civil War was over, and I believe the year was 1872, I think President Grant appointed Chester Arthur to be head of the Customs House. Arthur basically, pushed for the Republican nominee Grant to become president, so he got known by Grant, and he got to be known as a force in New York, so he wasn't totally an unknown. And after President Lincoln was president, the office of the presidency kind of went downhill. They weren't really good presidents then. It just went downhill for a lot of reasons. And the Republican Party was kind of getting, bad too. They were slothful, and they were getting disjointed, and they were fighting among themselves, and not a lot of good stuff was getting done. Also at that time, you had a lot of corruption in municipal level. You might have heard of Boss Tweed from New York City, and you had a lot of that, a lot of corruption in politics and in industry too. And so we have a power vacuum was filled by the captains of industry, who some of them were not so great either. They were kind of crooked, who's a captain? Well, a lot of them, the Rockefeller and a few others. And there was a time of power brokers. The president wasn't calling the shots; the power brokers were calling the shots. And the Republican Party had many dozen factions, but two main factions were the stalwarts and the half-breeds. That's what they called. And the half-breeds were led by James Blaine, and the stalwarts were led by Roscoe Conklin. And you sort of latched on to one of those parties, and if you want to move up in a party, move up in anywhere in life, and that's what Chester Arthur did. And he latched his coattails to Roscoe Conklin of the Republican stalwarts, and they were the power brokers of the day. Roscoe Conklin, and you can Google him. He was a real kingpin in Essex, three-time senator from New York. He got a lot of favors done for people. He's 6'3". He's 6'3", an amateur boxer, a bit of a peacock. And Arthur knew, I'm going to follow this guy around and grab his coattails. So they became friends. Conklin was probably, later on I read about Conklin. I'm going to go into him. He was kind of a hard guy to be friends with, but Chester Arthur managed to do that. But you had to really, suck up to him. And they lived a high life, smoked cigars, went to Delmonico's restaurant in New York, and, good life. And that was Roscoe Conklin's patronage. Patronage, you believe in patronage. Patronage, you do something for me, I'll give you a good job. And that goes all the way down the line. And that's the way the country worked after Lincoln, for a lot of the government and industry too. You really had some people in industry, that's a whole different story, but patronage was the way of the late 19th century. And the Customs House, New York, there's something in the news about this recently, but we didn't have an income tax back then, so the country paid for itself with customs duties. And the largest place of customs duties was New York City, and it was a very corrupt environment. And Chester Arthur was not corrupt. When he was quartermaster in New York, he came out poorer than when he went in because he didn't take, he worked hard and didn't take any money, which is kind of expected, but he wouldn't do that. And so now he's at the Customs House, which is another corrupt organization. And so he's doing that, and there's a lot of corruption down there. And he can't fix that corruption. You know, people are skimming things. It's a huge moneymaker. It is the main moneymaker for the federal government. Speaking of that, I just saw something last night about tariffs. I know a lot about this actually in a different world, but you raise tariffs now, it's going to be bad. We always talk about the smooth Hawley tariff, but this was back then, and tariffs were the main thing to get the income for the government, and New York City was the largest, and it was pretty corrupt. Had about 1,000 people working for it, and the idea of that started back in the 1828 when Andrew Jackson was president. He had a pretty professional civil service, but then Andrew Jackson came in, and he said, all my buddies are going to get jobs, and their buddies are going to give their buddies good jobs, and that's called the spoil system. And that's how the government worked for much of the 19th century. And it was not a good system. And everybody knew it wasn't a good system, but what are you going to do about it? So Arthur's a part of that. And in 1876, Grant's no longer president, and Rutherford Hayes, another president, becomes president, and he didn't like the stalwart branch of the Republican Party, so he gets rid of a lot of stalwarts, including collateral damage was Chester Arthur at Customs. So he's gone, and he does, he thought he did a good job. He didn't think that should have happened to him, but it did. Hayes, incidentally, Grant, if you know about Ulysses Grant, he liked to tip a little bit, and Hayes, the next term, his wife said was known as Lemonade Lucy. There was no liquor in the White House. So, and it was the Gilded Age. Many things are going on. Alexander Graham Bell was inventing telephone. Thomas Edison was inventing many things. Andrew Carnegie was making lots of money at steel. And this is all going to play. It's the Gilded Age. A lot of stuff's going on. The rich are really rich. The poor, like they've always been, I guess, in a way. And then there's the politics, the stalwarts, the half-breeds, and many other parts of Republicans. And Arthur's a part of this, living high with Conklin, doing a high life. And then all of a sudden, 1880, his wife, his beloved wife, they had 3 children, died suddenly after she had pneumonia. And he's like really devastated. And to keep himself from, grieving too much, he got more involved in Republican politics. And then comes the 1880 Republican convention. It seems like all these conventions are all in Chicago. I don't know why. I just Googled that before I came in and Googled it. And even the Democratic conventions are in Chicago, but Chicago seems to get a lot of them back to back to back. Not all of them, but a lot of them. It was a real crazy convention in 1880. James Garfield was a dark horse. And the 36th ballot, it lasted several days. And Garfield got the nod to be the Republican candidate for president. That's a pretty powerful nod. And he knew he had to carry the state of New York. And his first choice was a guy named Levi Morton. Not sure what his job was. But he turned it down. His second choice was back to New York. Chester Arthur, be my vice president. And this guy Conklin, he was like a little bit jealous that Arthur got that nod, and he told him not to take the thing. And Conklin said to Arthur, "Well, you should drop it if you were to have hot chew from the forge or something like that." And Arthur said, "Senator Conklin, I shall accept the nomination and with me carry the majority of the New York delegates." So right there, and then for so long told him not to do something, he went ahead and did it, took vice president, which definitely angered Conklin. And in the space of 2 years, Arthur had gone from the highest paid government bureaucrat at the Customs Department to, he made a lot of money in private practice, to the vice presidential candidate. So he did a lot. And but he broke down afterward because he realized his wife was no longer with him to enjoy the success. So he was a sentimental guy, believe it or not. And he was considered a political hack, and the expectations for Garfield were quite promising, but the expectations for Chester Arthur were pretty low. Well, Garfield was inaugurated in March and July. he's a real interesting case too. He was a general in the Civil War on success. He was a congressman and a senator from Ohio, and probably would have been a very good president, but he didn't have. Somebody has read a book about him years ago, and I told me about him. But very interesting. And in July, I think the date was July 2nd. Uh, Garfield, was shot in with today's Union Station in Washington D.C. And as I mentioned, it was a time of cronyism and patriotism, and that leads to a lot of bad things. And this guy thought he was going to get a government job by Garfield, kept bugging Garfield, and Garfield didn't even know who he was. And he said, so he shot Garfield. I did it. Is what he said. I did it, and I will go to jail for it. I am a stalwart, and Arthur will be president. When Arthur heard that, he was like, "Oh my God, I don't even know this guy." And he says, So he looked like he was implicated, but he wasn't. The guy was nuts. I think they hung him, and he, of course, was never ambassador to Austria. And Garfield hung on for about 2.5 months. At times it looked like he was getting better and worse, better and worse. And then as President this is what Arthur said, as President Garfield gets better, I get better too, because he didn't want the job. And after 2.5 months, Garfield died. And here's a new president, the fourth one in the 19th century to set the presidency after the death of a sitting president. And people used to say, Chet Arthur, President of the United States, good God. So people were really worried. And then the question was Vice President Arthur going to be, and President Arthur going to be two different men? And that's the gist of this thing. And the answer is definitely yes. Little was expected of him. He's supposed to be, as you said, a placekeeper. And he was not going to be a toady anymore to Conklin. He was a follower. That was what's so neat. He was a follower all his life. And all of a sudden, he's cast in the highest job in the country. And he changes. He changes for the better. And the country really benefit from that. And he realized that the president was not supposed to be a follower. And, he changed. And he had to put some distance between himself and a stalwart who was part of it for so long. And he found the courage to go against the forces that had controlled him for so long and to everyone's surprise. But in going against those forces, he really irritated some people. And that would come back and haunt him. In the spring of 1883, he went to New York and celebrated the opening of the Brooklyn Bridge. February 1885, he celebrated the opening of Washington Monument. And he entertained in D.C. His wife was gone, but his younger sister, Mary, was like the first lady or the hostess, the first lady hostess. That was his sister running as a female part of the Washington scene. In 1882, people were really getting the feedback, they're getting really mad about all the corruption in the country everywhere. And the Republican Party suffered pretty much a defeat because they were more corrupt. They were in power for so long in 1882. And they lost some serious seats, and came back on Chester Arthur. Well, you're not a good president. You didn't keep the power. Well, you take it a couple of different ways. I think he did his job, and so he makes more enemies because the Republican Party is losing some of their power. And as far as I'm concerned, he should have lost it. And then there was an interesting fellow. He was on General George McClellan's ticket for president of Seat Lincoln in '64 was a guy named George Pendleton from Ohio, and he was a copperhead from Ohio. One favored slavery in the North, and you wouldn't think anything would come from him that would be good. But he pushed for the Civil Service Reform Act, and that today is called the Pendleton Act, named after him. And boy, it was time for it, but it also took some hard work from Chester Arthur and from Pendleton and others too to change the civil service system. Arthur liked the British system, where it's based on merit. Before it was based on patriotism. Like you say, I don't know the example of the last president, but you say, come in, I'm with all my cronies around me, and then they hire their cronies, and it goes all the way down. It's terrible. You need CDC is a great example with Dr. Fauci. You need a certain amount of continuity and professionalism, and they knew it, and they wanted to get that, and and that's what you know. They took a test. I was a civil servant for a while. You took a test to be a civil servant, and you took there's certain pride in it too. To do a good job, you're not just because the president comes over, you're not going to lose their job. And Jackson started that, and Chester Arthur ended that basically by the Pendleton Act. Um, and it passed. And I love this. It was mixed hypocrisy when it passed by both sides, the Republicans and the Democrats. But it's like I had to do it. It's hypocrisy, mixed hypocrisy. I heard that. I like that. And it didn't clean up the government right away. And I'm sure the people who were in were kind of grandfathered out. So it took about 20 years for things to really get good. But today in the government, everybody knows what the Pendleton Act is and know it as a good thing. You know, to protect civil servants. You're in there. You don't have to change because one president changes and has an agenda, and it's good. It keeps the government rolling on an even keel and a smart keel, for that matter. Things like intelligence or even CDC diseases and stuff like that. You want continuity. You want professional people. Arthur understood that, and he basically pushed for that. Uh, he's considered the father of the modern Navy. Uh, After the Civil War, 90% of our ships were gone, and they were all most of them were wood. And the Carnegie's cranking out all the steel, and Arthur said, we need a modern Navy," and he had a modern Navy, and he did that. He pushed for that real hard. 14 years later, we're in the Spanish-American War. Teddy Roosevelt or William McKinley first, then Teddy Roosevelt were so happy they had steel ships that were worth a lot and did a lot of good, and that's why we won the Spanish-American War, because of Chester Arthur's foresight to get a steel navy, a navy of steel ships. Uh, and Then there's another interesting thing. That most people know the Chinese were out west, and they basically built the railroads and everything else. And then very similar to the situation today, there was uproar about all these Chinese, especially out west in California. And they were working as coolies. Their living status was terrible. They couldn't vote. Servants, laborers had a miserable life. But anything that went wrong, you blame it on the latest immigrants, the Chinese in this case. And and Arthur knew that wasn't exactly right. But a lot of people, they even burned Arthur in effigy in California. So there was a bill introduced in Congress. Senator wants to introduce a bill that's real important called the Chinese Exclusion Act. That keep the Chinese out and then not come anymore and keep them down. And Arthur said, "No, that's not good. You can't do that." And like I said, they burned him in effigy in California. And he didn't make a lot of friends. He made more enemies in Congress by taking that good stand. And Congress passed the bill to exclude the Chinese from the country, and Arthur vetoed it. So this is cruel and mean. It's not right. And Congressman came back with a little bit of a watered down one, and he knew he couldn't get over it. He knew he couldn't pass a veto. He vetoed it once. You can override a veto. He knew he couldn't pass the override and signed it. So he signs the bill, but he tried to get it watered down so it wouldn't hurt the Chinese so much. And so he had a sense of morality as a president. I like that very much so. Oh, what did he do in his spare time? He was a fisherman. He liked to go fishing. One time he was in the presidency. He was gone for almost 2 months. He went to Yellowstone. He just loved the West, and he was fishing all the time. So, yeah, no one missed him. I think that's a sign of a good leader when you walk away and no one misses you. But he did that for almost 2 months. And then late in his presidency, he thought he deserved the opportunity to have another term, but he knew he might not. And he was also getting sick. He has something called Bright's disease, which is a kidney disease. And he was losing energy, feeling fatigued, and not doing real well. And by the time the next convention came around, he was a man without a party. And he didn't get the nod. James Blaine, part of the half-breeds in Maine, got the nod. And he said his 3.5 years spent in the White House was the most unpleasant in his life. And most historians will say that Chester Arthur was one of the most honorable chief executives our country has ever had. When Arthur retired from the press, this is what he said: "Well, doesn't seem to be anything else for an ex-president to do but to go in the country and raise big pumpkins." It doesn't sound very sophisticated, but it's kind of it's kind of like him in a way. 1884 convention, he didn't get picked. James Blaine got picked, and the party was still badly fractured. The party I'm talking about, the Republican Party, and there's still corruption in there. He tried to clean up, and James Blaine lost to Grover Cleveland, and Cleveland won the when Cleveland was the mayor of Buffalo, and then Chester Arthur died in 1886 at only 57 years old, 2 years after he was out of the presidency. What's his legacy? I love some of these things there. It was a time of very divided politics, and he did an excellent job given those politics to serve the best interests of the country. He put the country first. If there's such a thing as integrity in a corrupt system, Chester Arthur had it. Arthur had a strong sense of fair play, as you saw with Chinese immigrants. He did not have to exaggerate a sense of himself. He was known as the gentleman boss, and he left the presidency in much better shape than when he came into it. I say it was going downhill after Lincoln for 20 years. 20 years later, and he left it in better shape. They say he was Arthur. He was an exceptional president. He deserves more from history. That's why I'm telling the story about him. He was a decent man and a decent president in an era when decency was in short supply. And Mark Twain said this upon Arthur's death, and he died. And Mark Twain had a front row seat at all this stuff in the late 19th century. It would be hard to do better than President Arthur's administration. And I think he's an underrated president that we don't know much about. And I don't have the books, but I read 2 books on him. I don't have them handy. I should have had them handy. But there's plenty you can read on him as any president. And I think he one of those bearded presidents in the late 19th century that was a damn good president. And I'm ready for questions.
Okay, question. Let me show the picture first.
Please.
Okay, this is the picture of President Chester Arthur.
Bit of facial hair.
Yeah, this is in the courtesy of National Portrait Gallery.
Correct.
Yeah. So,
I have a chapter of him in my book.
okay.
Chester Arthur.
Great. Yeah. So I have some question. What legacy did Chester Arthur leave our country?
I think cleaning up that civil service was huge. I mean, he did that in 1883, and to this day, 2024, we have a professional civil service. And that, people underestimate the value of that. And I think it's very important. That's number one and number two of modern Navy.
Okay. Okay, the next question. Chester Arthur politically grew up inside the corrupt political machinery of Roscoe Conclave, New York. What do you think contribute to others turn around to be able to stand up to his former mentor, Senator Coughlin?
This is a subjective question, and I'll give an answer to it. I think, as I studied him, and I think is correct. His wife died in 1880, and then Garfield died a year and a half later, and he saw President Garfield suffer and die, and I think that tempered him in such a way that there's I'm going to die too, and I'm going to do a good job what I got left. I think the death of those two people, his wife and his president, and he was right there when Garfield was dying. He was visiting him every day, and he saw the pain he was going through, and he realized. And Garfield would have been a good president too. I don't doubt that, but he saw that and he said, "You know what? I can't. No longer am I going to kiss Roscoe Conklin. You know what? I got to be my own man." And he was. I think those two things, that's those two people. That I never read it anywhere, but I think that's my take on it. Two people close to him.
Wonderful. Yeah. So it's he's like a hero to stand up in the corrupt society.
Yeah, he played the game for a while, and he stood up to it, and not many people know of him. And that's what I do. That's why in my book I look at people, unsung heroes in American history.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you so much. That's all the question I have. But let's see if we have any question from our viewer.
Okay, I love
it. Everybody, please type in your question on the platform that you are watching, we can see your question. Bring it on. Rick is ready to answer your question.
I read two big books on 'em.
Yeah, yeah. Appreciate you spending time to do research and summarize the history, the wonderful history to learn about. Okay. Well, I don't see any question. Just wait one more minute and I'll post Rick's information here. Rick's information. His book is called "They Made America Great," and he has about 30 chapters of each individual heroes in his book, and Chester Arthur is one of the chapters. So
Right, about 31 actually. Yeah.
yeah. So go to rickroad.com and purch- purchase his book. If you enjoy the history, you will get a lot of information, a lot of good idea, good information from.
Well, I mean, as a country, we don't know where we came from. Mark Twain said, um, "If history doesn't rhyme, it sure. If history doesn't repeat itself, it surely rhymes."
Yeah,
And we learn. Harry Truman said, "The only thing you don't know is the history you don't know. The only thing new is the history you don't know." Excuse me. So
yeah,
I'm into history, and I'll talk a little more about it next week too, next month.
yeah. Well, just like communism, I'm a survivor of the communist regime, but
Right.
a lot of people have no idea and they still buy into the concept and they think it's good. And
Yeah,
that means they didn't learn anything about what happened.
that's right.
What happened? So yeah, Cambodia suffered almost 50 years ago, and we lost about 2 million people in a small country that have only 7 million.
Right.
So it's a shame that other countries didn't know about it or didn't care about it, and they went into the same path like
Right.
Cuba, and other countries might follow that path and without knowing the danger. That's the danger of not knowing.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah, not learning the history is dangerous. All right, Rick. If we don't see any question, so there's one. Hold on, there's one coming up. Oh, Carlton. Carlton said, "How does others' time compare to today?"
That's interesting. He stood up and was unpopular, and it cost him. Today, everybody, it's not. Uh, how does it compare to today? Hmm. That's a good question. There was one party in charge for a very long time. They got corrupt. It was a two-party system, but it wasn't. And he went above party. Good example. He was hired in party politics. Party politics say you stick with Roscoe Conklin or Blaine or somebody else. And Arthur, when he became president, said, "No, I'm not going to stick with the party. I'm going to do the right thing for America." And there's a lesson there. The man uses his integrity and his moral compass to do the right thing, and it's going to cost him. And it did cost him. He wasn't president again. So in that regard, yes. And the one party was really corrupt. They were around for a long time, and they were cronies. And I think that Arthur was a man of foresight in a sea of people. We're all going together in the crowd. As best I can answer that.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for the question, Carlton. Any more questions? Please feel free to ask. Everybody is quiet.
Well, next month, I'm going to talk about a battle in the Civil War, the Battle of Shiloh. And James Garfield was a general in that battle. We talked a little bit about him today. So that'll be a battlefield talk. So a little bit. I already got the books on order.
Yeah. The website is on the screen, rickrhodes.com. If you want to get a hold of my book, I'll put my banner up quickly. How I Survived the Killing Fields. It's available on my website, sarahim.com/book. But I think if you enjoy the history, if you will like my book. I'm talking about the communism in my country, how I make it through. But Rick's book is the history of people that made America great.
Yeah, unsung heroes in history in America.
Mm, yeah. All right. Well, if no other question, we just want to thank Rick for his research, his reading, his summary, and shared with us. And if you enjoy this, come back next week, next month. No, nothing else, nothing happened next week. It's next
Next month,
month.
yeah, the Battle of Shiloh, which is, if you don't know anything about it, that's when the Civil War really started. You know, after a year after Fort Sumter.
Yeah, it's on the third Thursday at 4 o'clock. You might want to mark your calendar, but I will post it to remind everybody a few days before the event. So if no other question, we'll say goodbye for now. And everyone have a wonderful day, wonderful weekend. And thank you so much, Rick.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye now.
Bye bye.